In this lesson, we're going to solve multi-step inequalities. Example 1, how do I solve two-step inequalities? All right, so remember that when multiplying or dividing by a negative number, you must reverse the inequality symbol, which is the same thing as flipping it. So for number 1, we have negative 4x plus 3 is greater than 15. Remember that we solve these just like we do equations, except for when we multiply or divide by a negative, we have to reverse or flip that inequality symbol. So we're isolating the variable. We're trying to get down to our x right here. So we're going to undo the positive 3 by subtracting the 3. So we want all variables on one side, all the numbers on the other side. And since we already have all the variables on one side, we started with our numbers. And then I've got 15 minus 3 is 12. Now we're going to divide by negative 4. And remember, when you divide by a negative, that you have to flip the inequality symbol. And so you're going to have x is less than negative 3. So again, because we divided by that negative, notice how we flipped that inequality symbol. So now let's go ahead and put that on the graph. I'm going to find negative 3 on the graph, and then because it's less than, it's going to be open, and it's going to go to the left because it's less than. So now would be a good place for you to pause the video to do number 2 and then resume the video to check your work. All right, for number 2, the first step was to subtract the 8, and to isolate the variable, then we divided by 7, and we had x is greater than 2. So when we graphed it, we had open on the 2, and then we graphed it going to the right because it was greater. All right, so for question number 3, we have 6 minus x is less than or equal to 18. So be careful on this one. That's a positive 6. All the variables are on one side, so all the numbers have to go to the other. And so we're undoing this positive 6 by minusing the 6 because that negative goes with that x. So don't forget to bring down your negative x is less than or equal to then 12. And then now let's place a 1 right there so we know that we need to divide by negative 1. And now we just divided by a negative. So we have to remember to flip our inequality symbol, and then 12 divided by negative 1 is negative 12. So now let's find negative 12 on the number line, and it's greater than or equal to, so we're going to have a closed dot, and then we're going to the right. So the solutions are anything that is. For question number 4, you have x divided by 2 plus 1 is greater than or equal to 6. This would be another good place for you to pause the video to solve number 4 and then resume it to check your work. All right, so when isolating your variable, hopefully you subtracted the 1 to isolate the x because the x's are already on one side. And then the 2 is dividing the x. So we would multiply by 2 on both sides, and we get x is greater than or equal to 10, where then you'd have a solid dot, and then you'd be shading to the right. All right, example 2, how do I solve multi-step inequalities? So we have for number 1, we have negative 1/3 times x plus 12 is less than 5. So remember, we need to distribute that negative 1/3 first. So I will take, and I'll have negative 1/3 x, and then minus 4, because 1/3 of 12 is 4, and then we had a negative, and then less than 5. All right, so now let's isolate the variable. So we're trying to get down to the x, so we're going to undo the, and bring all of the numbers without the variables to the one side, since the variables are already on one side. So we have negative 1/3 x, and then we have is less than 9. Now let's get that negative 1/3. All right, the negative 1/3 is multiplying the variable. So we undo multiplication by dividing. And remember, dividing a fraction is the same thing as multiplying by its reciprocal. So the reciprocal of negative 1 all over 3 is negative 3 all over 1, or just negative 3. So I'm multiplying by a negative 3 on both sides. and then that's going to cancel that out. So, and because I just multiplied by a negative, I have to reverse or flip my inequality symbol, and I have negative 27. So we're going to find negative 27 on your number line, and it's going to be open because it's just greater than, and it's going to be shaded going to the right. All right, question number 2. We have 7x minus 13x minus 21 is less than 9. Notice how we need to simplify before we can start solving here. We need to take the 7x minus the 13x. So we'll end up with negative 6x minus 21 is less than 9. All right, so now that we've simplified, we have all the variables on one side, so now we need to make sure that all the numbers are on the other. So we're going to undo that negative 21 by adding 21 to both sides. And so now we have negative 6x is less than 30. And the negative 6 is multiplying the variable, so we're going to divide by a negative 6. And when we divide by a negative, remember, we have to flip the inequality sign. So we're going to have x is greater than negative 5. So we'll have negative 5 on the number line, open, and then it'll be shaded going to the right. All right, question number 3. Notice how we need to distribute that 3 to simplify first. So we're going to distribute and multiply. 3 times 2x is 6x. We'll have minus 21, and then is greater than 15. So all variables are on one side, so we need to undo the numbers without the variables. So we're going to add the 21 to both sides, and we have 6x is greater than 36. All right, so now we need to isolate the variable by dividing by the 6, and x is going to be greater than 6. So let's go ahead and we'll graph that. So we're going to locate the 6, and because it's greater than, we're going to have an open circle, and we're going to go to the right. All right, number 4. Let's go ahead then. And notice how we have n minus, and then we've got 2n minus 9 in parentheses. I would put a 1 right here so that we know that we need to distribute that negative 1. So I'm going to bring the n down, and I'm going to distribute, and I'll have minus 2n, and then negative times a negative is a positive, so we'll have plus 9, and then is less than or equal to 4. So I'm also going to put a 1 right there, because notice how we still need to simplify these right here. So 1n minus 2n is negative 1n plus 9 is less than or equal to 4. All right, so we need to then isolate the variable, and variables are already one side, so we're going to minus the 9, and we have negative 1n is less than or equal to negative 5. So now we're going to divide by negative 1, and n, then since we just divided by a negative, we need to flip our inequality symbol. So negative 5 divided by negative 1 is then 5. And so we'll locate the 5, and it's greater than or equal to, so it will be closed, and then we'll be shading to the right. All right, example number 3, write and solve real-world inequalities. So a gas station charges $9 for a car wash and $2.20 per gallon of gasoline. Write and solve the inequality that represents how many gallons you can buy if you have $30. So I like to always put the total on the right, and then I'm going to write the inequality on the left. So we're going to pay for just one car wash, so that's 9. And then notice we have the per gallon, so then that means that it's going to be plus $2.20 per, which then we'll have our x, because we don't know how many gallons. And then now let's talk about how to place our inequality symbol. Remember, we can spend all of the $30, so I could have an equal sign. And this part over here represents how much I can spend. So then that part right there, you can have it equal to 30, but it cannot be greater than 30. So your inequality symbol is going to go to the left. So now we need to solve it to find the number of gallons of gasoline that you can buy. So we would subtract the 9, So we have 2.20x is less than or equal to then 21, and we'll divide by the $2.20. And so when you solve it, then we'll have x is less than or equal to 9 point, I'm just going to round it. I'm going to say 9.5. All right, so how many gasolines, what are some possible amounts in gallons of gasoline you can buy? So we could buy 3 gallons, we could buy 6 gallons, and I could also buy 9.5 gallons. But anything more than 9.5, I cannot purchase. So there's 3 separate solutions. So question number 2, Jerry worked on his computer for at least 180 minutes in 5 days. He worked 60 minutes the first day. For the remaining 4 days, he worked on his computer an equal amount of time each day. All right, so he's working for 5 days, and on the first day, he worked for the 60 minutes. Now, each of the additional 4 days, we don't know how much time he worked, but we know that it's going to be equal. So we're going to write that as 4x. And he worked for at least 180 minutes. All right, so now let's figure out how many minutes that would have been. So remember, to write the inequality piece then, so at least 180 minutes. So that means he could have equal to 180 minutes. The lowest amount he can have is 180. So that means that he could also have greater than, but he could not have less than. So now we're going to then minus the 60. We'll just solve and isolate the variable. And if 4x is greater than or equal to 120, so then when you divide by 4, we're going to have x's greater than or equal to then 30. So what that means is he's going to work at least 30 minutes per day for those days, for each one of those days. So it could be 30, it could be greater than 30, it could not be less than 30 minutes per day. All right, so that our lesson doesn't get to be too long, we're going to stop and not do number 3. So in this lesson, we took a look at how to write and solve multi-step inequalities.